Hey guys, tonight we drift back in time, way back, to a Japan where the air smells faintly of wood smoke and cedar, where the streets are so still you can hear the faint snap of a paper lantern in the wind. It's late evening in Eto, and the day's bustle has folded itself into the corners like a neatly packed kimono. The shop fronts are shuttered, the alley cats have claimed their rooftops, and here you are, padding along the narrow lanes with the kind of cautious curiosity that makes every shadow feel like a secret. Somewhere out there, a samurai is tucking himself in, or more accurately, preparing for a bedtime routine so ceremonious you'd think it was another form of battle. The air is cool and damp. Lantern light pools on the paving stones in buttery circles, swaying gently as if they've had a little too much sake. You glance up, noticing how the night sky is both endless and close at once, framed by the overhanging eaves of wooden buildings. A pair of guards strolls past, their sandals whispering against the stones, hands never far from the hilts at their sides. You probably wouldn't survive this if you shouted "pillow fight" right now, but give it a few hours. Things will get strangely domestic. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is there. I'm nosy like that. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your sandals scuff over the wooden threshold of a side street, and the noise of the main road fades behind you. The houses here stand a little closer, their walls latticed with shadows from the lanterns swinging overhead. Through an open shoji screen, you catch a glimpse of someone kneeling at a low table, carefully arranging a lacquered tray. It's not food they're handling, it's a bedding set, rolled and bound with cloth ties. Samurai didn't exactly collapse into bed like exhausted modern humans. No, bedtime in Edo, Japan was another performance of discipline, grace, and a quiet sort of pride. One mainstream historical fact you can't ignore: samurai homes weren't lavishly large. Even high-ranking warriors lived in spaces that prized simplicity, partly because clutter was both impractical and dishonorable. Rooms were often multi-purpose. By day, a training or receiving area. By night, the same space transformed into a bedroom. Bedding wasn't left lying around. It was stored in tansu chests or alcoves, brought out only when needed, then folded away again before sunrise. The tatami beneath your feet is cool and faintly springy, its scent earthy and grassy from the woven rush straw. And here's a quirkier tidbit. Pillow height was not a matter of comfort alone. The makura, wooden or lacquered headrests often topped with a small cushion, kept elaborate hairstyles intact overnight. Imagine training with swords all day, then sleeping on something that feels more like a decorative block than a cloud, all so you could wake up with your hair ready for public honor. That's dedication or stubbornness, depending on your back pain tolerance. As you wander further, you notice the neighborhood rhythm slowing. People carry water buckets to douse hearth embers, and the aroma of grilled fish and miso fades, replaced by the cleaner smell of the night air. In the corner of a courtyard, a man in loose indigo yukata adjusts a hanging lantern, muttering about the wind. The soft orange light spills over the lacquered railings, giving everything that warm, sleep-ready glow. Historians still argue whether samurai genuinely valued leisure at night, or whether these calmer hours were just another duty-laden performance. Some records suggest they allowed themselves moments of quiet indulgence, reading poetry, sipping tea, even light-hearted pillow games, while others insist that every waking and sleeping moment was under the watch of self-imposed discipline. Whatever the truth, you can feel the weight of ritual here, as if even the act of folding a quilt is done with the same precision as tying a sword belt. You pass a narrow garden path leading toward the back of a residence. Crickets sing in high, steady rhythms, and from somewhere beyond the wall comes the faint pluck of a shamisen. You pause listening. It's not a love ballad, it's something slower, more meditative, the kind of music that helps the mind loosen its grip on the day. A young page appears, carrying what looks like a small tray of polished wood. Balanced atop it, a ceramic dish, a folded square of soft fabric, and a tiny pouch of dried herbs. He disappears into the house, sliding the shoji closed behind him, but not before you smell the faint herbal sweetness. Likely yomogi mugwort, believed to keep bad dreams away. You start to realize bedtime here isn't about unconsciousness. It's a careful passage into a different realm, one where a warrior can lay down his blade but never his alertness. Somewhere ahead, voices rise briefly in laughter, unexpected in the quiet street. You turn a corner and spot two men in casual robes leaning in the doorway of a tea house, sharing some private joke. They part ways with a small bow, one of them stepping into the darkness with a purposeful stride. The other lingers a moment longer, then disappears inside. You get the sense that laughter here is a precious commodity, saved for the right moment, shared with trusted company. As you walk on, you feel the texture of the night deepen. The lanterns seem dimmer now, not from any lack of oil, but because your eyes have settled into the rhythm of shadow and glow. You reach another courtyard, this one with a low bamboo fence and a single pine tree leaning at an angle, its needles whispering in the breeze. A woman in a pale yukata steps out carrying a wooden bucket, the water within catching the lantern light in ripples. She tips it gently over the stone basin, the sound soft and hollow, then retreats without a word. You notice something. There's no rush here. Even the smallest motions, from pouring water to adjusting a lantern wick, are unhurried. It's as if the entire district knows that nothing else matters until morning, so why waste the stillness with haste? Yet, under it all, there's that subtle hum of readiness. The sense that if trouble came knocking, the night would snap from serene to sharp in an instant. You pause near a wooden bridge, leaning on the railing as you look out over the dark canal. Somewhere far off, a temple bell sounds. Deep, resonant, and final for the day. You feel it in your chest more than you hear it, like the exhale of the entire city. The bell fades, leaving only the sound of water moving under the bridge, and for a moment the world is nothing but this. Lantern light, faint music, distant laughter, and the whisper of sandals on stone. You step away from the bridge, your feet carrying you toward a faintly lit doorway, where a warm yellow glow seeps through the shoji screens. Inside, a man kneels beside what at first looks like a small wooden chest. But when he unlatches it, you see bundles of neatly folded cloth, each tied with a soft cord. This is the bedding. Futon mats rolled so precisely they could pass a military inspection. And then, sitting almost like a relic on a separate shelf, you see it. The pillow. Samurai didn't rest their heads on the kind of plush, overstuffed clouds you might sink into after a Netflix binge. No, the Makura was a curious marriage of utility and aesthetics. Most were built from carved wood or lacquered bamboo, topped with a small removable cushion that could be swapped or washed. You reach out, imagining the texture, cool, hard, with just enough give to stop your skull from rebelling entirely. These pillows weren't designed for indulgence. They were guardians of the day's meticulous grooming. If you'd spent hours getting your top knot just right, the last thing you wanted was a restless night, turning it into a bird's nest. One mainstream fact to keep in mind: in Edo period Japan, hair was more than a style. It was a statement of class, rank, and identity. A samurai's shanmage wasn't simply fashionable, it told you who he was, how disciplined he lived, and how well he respected tradition. Preserving it overnight was as important as keeping one's sword polished. And that's where the pillow came in, a small but mighty defender of honor. And hair. Here's the quirky part. Not all pillows were purely functional. Some wealthy samurai commissioned makura with hidden compartments. Imagine a lacquered headrest that doubled as a miniature safe, holding coins, love letters, or perhaps a folded order from a superior. You could literally sleep on your secrets. If someone did try to steal from you in the night, you'd probably wake up halfway between a dream about plum blossoms and an unscheduled sword demonstration. You watch as the man inside unrolls his bedding over the tatami. The futon is thin but soft, its cotton filling neatly stitched into even channels. There's a faint scent, maybe camphor or cedar, woven into the fibers, a natural deterrent against insects. The pillow is placed at the head with a deliberate gesture, like setting the final piece of a puzzle. Then, almost ceremoniously, he pats it once, as if to signal that the day is officially ending. Historians still argue whether comfort was ever the primary goal of these pillows. Some suggest the hardness was intentional, a way to prevent warriors from falling into too deep a sleep, ensuring they remained semi-alert. Others argue that the emphasis on preserving hairstyles simply overrode any thoughts about plushness. Either way, you start to suspect that your memory foam pillow back home is an unearned luxury, though your neck might disagree. You move deeper into the house, invited by the faint sound of conversation. A small group sits in a circle, their pillows lined neatly beside them. They're not sleeping yet. The makura here are props in a kind of social wind-down. One man leans back against his, another idly rolls his palm along the polished wood. They discuss the day, not in rushed bursts, but in long, measured sentences. There's a rhythm to their words, like low tide slowly lapping against the shore. A young boy, perhaps a page or apprentice, brings in a small bowl of warm water. One of the men dips a cloth into it and begins wiping down his pillow, removing dust and restoring its sheen. It's not just a bedtime object, it's a maintained possession, as cared for as the blade resting in the corner. You glance toward an alcove where a decorative pillow sits untouched, embroidered with a swirling wave pattern in indigo and gold. It's clearly not for sleeping, more like a display piece to impress guests. This, you realize, is another layer of samurai life, the blending of practicality with quiet displays of refinement. Even the humble pillow could be a canvas for artistry, especially if you had the coin and connections to commission one. Through an open panel, you see the garden bathed in moonlight. A pillow rests on the Ingawa veranda, as if someone had been napping there earlier. The surface of the wood still holds the heat from the day, making it a natural warm spot even in the cool night. You picture a samurai lounging there, half asleep, one ear tuned to the night sounds, the other to the possibility of being summoned. Another detail catches your attention. Pillows weren't always shared between spouses or family members. Each person had their own, and often their own sleeping space within the shared room. Privacy might be limited, but one's pillow was personal, an intimate possession, not to be borrowed without permission. In some stories, lending your pillow was seen as a sign of deep trust, almost as intimate as sharing a drink from the same cup. A breeze stirs the paper screens and you hear the faint rustle of the garden's bamboo. Somewhere, a nightbird calls once and then falls silent. The household begins to dim its lights. The man you first saw places his pillow under his head, folding one arm across his chest, the other resting lightly beside him. His breathing slows, but you notice his posture isn't slack. He lies as though even sleep must obey the rules. You slip back outside into the quiet street, the image of that polished wooden pillow lingering in your mind. There's something strangely grounding about it, a reminder that even the smallest objects in this world are shaped by purpose, ritual, and a refusal to compromise. You wonder how you'd fare trying to fall asleep on one tonight. Probably about as well as a cat trying to nap on a basketball. Lanterns sway faintly above you, their paper skins casting gentle patterns on the ground. Your steps feel softer now, as if the night itself is cushioning your way forward. Somewhere ahead, you know, there are more rituals to uncover. Layers of silk, whispers over tea, and maybe, just maybe, a mischievous pillow fight waiting to happen. You follow the narrow street until it opens into a courtyard, the kind that seems to trap moonlight like water in a basin. A faint breeze slides through the wooden gates, carrying the smell of pine resin and charcoal. From somewhere inside the house, you hear the soft, rhythmic swish of cloth, a sound too deliberate to be accidental. You step closer, sliding off your sandals at the threshold, and peek inside. A samurai stands with his back to you, facing a low, lacquered chest. He's unfolding a robe with the same care you've seen given to a katana blade. This isn't his day attire. There's no armor, no stiff layers of formal wear. Instead, he holds a light silk yukata, the fabric whispering as he shakes it free of creases. You catch the faint glimmer of indigo threads woven into the otherwise pale cloth, a subtle detail that suggests both refinement and restraint. The mainstream fact here is simple but telling. Samurai had strict codes for dress even at home, and this extended to bedtime. While the kimono worn for sleep wasn't as formal as one for public occasions, it still had to meet certain expectations: clean, well-kept, and seasonally appropriate. The yukata was often the choice for warmer nights, while in colder months a thicker cotton or lined garment might replace it. The point wasn't luxury, it was discipline, an outward reflection of inner order. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some samurai were known to wear their sleeping robes in ways that maintained a ready appearance. Loose enough for comfort, yes, but arranged so that if they had to step outside in the middle of the night, say to answer a challenge or attend to a disturbance, they'd still look composed. Imagine your modern pajamas suddenly needing to pass a midnight sword duel dress code. You watch as the man smooths the yukata along the tatami, folds the collar just so, then slips it over his shoulders. The silk catches the lantern light in soft waves, flowing down his arms before he ties the sash. Not too tight, not too loose. His movements are unhurried, as though each knot and fold is part of a silent, centuries-old conversation with himself. Historians still argue whether this level of attention to nighttime dress was born from vanity, practicality, or simply habit, drilled into every layer of a samurai's life. Some suggest that even in private, a warrior maintained composure as a form of self-respect. Others believe it was partly about readiness. If an alarm rang, there'd be no scrambling into proper attire. The debate never quite ends, probably because the truth sits quietly in the middle. In the adjoining room, another man adjusts his robe while kneeling before a small mirror stand. His hair, still bound in the neat chonmage, casts a crescent-shaped shadow across the reflective surface. He dips a cloth into a shallow basin, dabs his face, then pats it dry. No soap, no perfumes, just a quick ritual to cleanse the day away. It's a gesture that feels as much mental as physical, like drawing a line between daylight duties and night's temporary surrender. Near the door, folded on a low bench, are two more yukata, one in soft gray with a faint crane pattern, another in deep brown. Both are simple but carry quiet elegance. You imagine them worn during different moods. The cranes for a serene, reflective evening, the brown for a more grounded, no-nonsense kind of night. In a world where even rest is choreographed, the choice might speak volumes. You catch the scent of freshly laundered cloth, clean, faintly herbal, perhaps from a rinse in well water steeped with pine needles or citrus peel. It's subtle, but enough to suggest that care went into every detail. No one here would dream of sleeping in something musty or wrinkled. A young page enters, balancing a small wooden tray with a neatly folded robe atop it. He bows, sets it beside the older samurai, and retreats without a word. The exchange is quiet, almost invisible, but you notice the robe's sash already knotted loosely for easy wear. This isn't just service, it's anticipation of need, a skill honed in households where the smallest disruptions are smoothed away before they happen. From the garden outside, a gust of wind rattles the bamboo fencing. A few leaves drift in through the half-open panel, and the samurai steps over to slide it closed. His robe swishes softly as he moves, the hem just grazing the tatami. You realize that in this world, even the sound of clothing is part of the atmosphere. No rustling polyester here, just the soft hush of natural fibers. One of the men now sits cross-legged, sipping from a small cup of water. The yukata drapes neatly over his knees, the sleeves arranged so they won't trail on the floor. He doesn't slump or sprawl. His posture is as precise as it was at midday, only softened by the dim light and the promise of sleep ahead. In a corner, you notice a neatly folded hakama, a pair of pleated trousers, not intended for sleep but placed close by. It's another layer of readiness. If a sudden summons came, he could be dressed in moments, trading the flowing yukata for the crisp formality of martial attire. You step back into the courtyard where the air is cooler now. Lanterns swing lightly in the wind, their light flickering over the walls. The image of silk robes and careful folds lingers in your mind, and you wonder how different your own nights would feel if every movement before bed was deliberate, every choice of fabric a statement. Of course that you'd probably trip over your own sash before making it to the futon, but that's beside the point. The samurai had their reasons for such precision. Pride, readiness, and maybe a touch of vanity. But the result is the same. Even in sleep, they remained composed, a shadow of their daytime selves resting in quiet dignity. Your path leads onward, past the sliding doors and down a narrow hall, where the faint scent of tea suggests that the night's routines aren't quite finished yet. The hallway narrows, the tatami under your feet soft but firm, carrying you toward that unmistakable aroma. Earthy, green, with a whisper of roasted warmth. You turn the corner into a small room where a low table sits in the middle, lacquer gleaming under the lantern's glow. Around it, 3 men in neatly arranged yukata lean forward, each cradling a small ceramic cup between steady hands. The tea is steaming gently, curling into the air like the last thoughts of a long day. This isn't the frantic, jitter-making brew of a modern workday. It's something gentler, something meant to guide the body into stillness. A mainstream historical fact. Japanese tea culture wasn't just about flavor, it was ritual, philosophy, and social signal rolled into one. Even at night, the act of brewing and pouring tea was deliberate, almost meditative. For samurai, it wasn't unusual to sip a mild bancha or genmaicha before bed, the low caffeine content keeping the mind calm rather than wired. One man tips the pot, letting the pale amber liquid flow in a thin, controlled stream. The sound of it hitting the cup is so delicate you can barely hear it, but it's enough to make you think of rain tapping against a paper umbrella. The others watch without interrupting. Every movement here has its own moment, and no one rushes the process. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some samurai believed certain teas could influence dreams. Mugwort-infused blends were said to ward off nightmares, while others claimed that a pinch of chrysanthemum in your cup might invite visions of clarity or even glimpses of the future. Whether that worked or not, it added an extra layer of intention to this nightly ritual. Your tea wasn't just a drink, it was a mood set for your unconscious mind. You settle on a cushion near the wall, close enough to catch fragments of the conversation. It isn't idle chatter about the weather or the price of rice. They're discussing life, honor, and a little philosophy. Just enough to make you feel like you've wandered into a midnight lecture with tea service. Is a man's honor carried in his deeds? One asked quietly. Or in how he carries his heart when no one is looking? The second man considers, his fingers curling around the cup as if holding the warmth helps him think. Both, he says, but the heart comes first. Without it, the deeds mean nothing. The third man, older, lets out a faint chuckle. And yet, a blade drawn at the wrong time can tarnish both. Historians still argue whether these late-night philosophical discussions were common among samurai, or if they're a romanticized echo of Bushido ideals. Some sources suggest warriors genuinely pondered such questions, especially in peaceful Edo times when actual combat was rare. Others argue these moments were exceptions, not the rule, more about maintaining an image of refinement than indulging in true intellectual exploration. The tea is poured again, the pot making a soft clink as it rests back on its stand. You lift your cup, the warmth seeping into your palms. The flavor is mellow with a faint grassy sweetness. It's the kind of drink that makes your shoulders loosen without you realizing it. Outside, a night breeze drifts through the partially open shoji, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then falls silent. The men don't flinch. The outside world exists, but right now it's just background. One of them begins a quiet story about a friend who dreamed of cherry blossoms falling in winter. A dream he took as a sign to visit his aging parents before the year ended. When he did, he arrived just in time to help them through an illness. The men nod, not dismissing the tale as coincidence. In this room, omens and meaning aren't things to scoff at. The kettle hisses faintly, steam spiraling upward. You can hear the subtle crackle of the brazier's coals beneath it. There's a rhythm to this gathering. Pour, sip, reflect. It's as if the tea itself is pacing the conversation, keeping it measured and unhurried. Your gaze drifts to the shelves along the wall. A few scrolls are stacked neatly, brush-painted calligraphy on their covers. Perhaps these are poems or philosophical writings meant for quiet nights like this. The brushwork is fluid but deliberate, much like the movements you've been watching all evening. Someone refills your cup, and you realize the tea's warmth is doing more than relaxing you. It's anchoring you to the moment. The faint bitterness lingers on your tongue, and with it, the awareness that this is a rare thing in your own life. A pause that's not about distraction, but about settling into yourself. Another story surfaces, this one about a man who refused to duel because he'd dreamed of breaking his blade. He took it as a warning and stayed home that day, only to hear later that his would-be opponent had died in a sudden street brawl with another. The men debate whether this was wisdom or cowardice, but no one reaches a conclusion. The questions are left open like paper lanterns drifting down a river, meant to be admired, not answered. The tea is nearly gone. The last drops poured with the same care as the first. The cups are rinsed in warm water, dried with clean cloths, and set upside down on the tray. The brazier's coals glow faintly, their warmth sinking into the tatami. When the men rise, their movements are slow and unforced. The night isn't over, they're simply moving from one quiet ritual to the next. You follow them toward another room, where the mood is about to shift from meditative to mischievous. There's talk of training exercises, but from the way they're smiling, you suspect these might involve more laughter than swordplay. You trail after them, the faint pad of feet on tatami leading you into a wider room with bare walls and a high ceiling. The lanterns here are brighter, their light pooling on the floor like polished amber. A few futon rolls lean against the far wall, and beside them, stacked neatly, are pillows. More than you've seen in any one place tonight. Not the elegant lacquered makura of earlier, but softer cloth-covered ones stuffed with buckwheat hulls. They look innocent enough, but the way these samurai are eyeing them, you know something's up. A mainstream fact worth noting, while samurai life was famously disciplined, moments of levity did exist, especially in times of peace. In Edo, Japan, martial households sometimes encouraged harmless diversions to build camaraderie among retainers, particularly younger ones. These pillow fights weren't the chaotic flailing you might remember from childhood sleepovers. They were more like structured mock battles, sometimes even with rules about striking only certain parts of the body or scoring points for technique. And here's the quirky tidbit. Some pillow fights doubled as stealth drills, using light, non-lethal weapons in low light-trained warriors to react quickly without drawing an actual blade. If you tripped over a futon or smacked into a wall, at least the worst injury would be a bruised ego and maybe a bit of teasing over morning rice. The men formed two loose groups, each casually taking a pillow from the pile. There's no announcement, no signal, just a shift in posture, the kind of readiness you've seen before in the dojo. Only here it's paired with suppressed grins. One man adjusts his yukata sash, another tosses his pillow lightly from hand to hand, testing its weight. Historians still argue whether these nighttime games were common practice or rare indulgence. Some claim they were an open secret among younger retainers, tolerated by their seniors as long as they didn't interfere with duties. Others insist that the pillow fight is a romanticized embellishment, exaggerated by later storytellers who wanted to soften the image of the stoic warrior. But tonight, you're watching it happen. Whatever historians say, the laughter is real. A younger samurai makes the first move, darting forward and swinging his pillow in a clean arc toward an older opponent's shoulder. The impact makes a muffled thump, and the older man pivots away, his robe swishing dramatically. He retaliates with a swift, low strike that knocks the younger man off balance. They recover quickly, circling like cats in a playful standoff. Another pair engages at the far end of the room. One feints left, then whips the pillow around from the right, catching his friend squarely on the hip. The recipient staggers back, laughing so hard he nearly drops his weapon. You realize that, beneath the laughter, there's still an undercurrent of martial skill. The footwork is careful, the strikes precise. This isn't just flinging cushions, it's an echo of the day's sword drills, translated into fabric and feathers. The air in the room shifts as the pace quickens. Pillows whoosh through the air, thudding softly against shoulders, arms, and occasionally heads. There are mock groans of defeat, exaggerated tumbles to the floor, and good-natured jeers in between. Someone tries a daring overhead strike, only for his opponent to duck and send him spinning toward the wall. A pillow hits the tatami beside you, and you catch it automatically, the buckwheat hulls shifting inside with a rustle. One man catches your eye and grins. "Careful," he warns playfully. "Holding a pillow means you're in the fight." Before you can object, he's already advancing. You sidestep badly, and his swing catches your shoulder in a surprisingly solid hit. You swing back without thinking, and he laughs, retreating into the chaos. The noise is contained, almost respectful. No one is shouting, and the thuds are muted by the thick walls. Still, the energy is undeniable. You notice that the older warriors stay slightly apart, watching with amused detachment. They occasionally call out mock advice. "Mind your footing," or "That strike would never get past armor." Every so often, they'll step in for a brief exchange, reminding everyone why they're still the most formidable in the room, even with a pillow in hand. After several minutes, the action slows. Pillows are lowered, breaths are caught. A few men drop to their knees, laughing quietly as they wipe sweat from their brows. The room smells faintly of warmed fabric and the herbal undertone of laundered robes. One man tosses his pillow back onto the stack with a satisfied sigh. There's no winner declared, no tally kept. The game ends as unceremoniously as it began. By silent agreement, the warriors return to their futons, the pillows once again just pillows. But you can feel the shift in the room's atmosphere. The tension of the day has been broken. The kind of unspoken camaraderie that only comes from shared, slightly ridiculous moments has been restored. As you step back into the hallway, you catch one last glimpse of the room. The lanterns sway gently, the pillows rest in neat piles, and the men are already settling into calmer rhythms. Adjusting bedding, stretching sore muscles, murmuring goodnights. You realize that for all the ceremony and composure of samurai life, there's still space for something as human as a late-night laugh. And maybe you think, that's what makes these men more than just warriors. They're people who can swing a sword with deadly precision by day and swing a pillow with equal dedication by night. The hallway narrows again, the lantern light thinning into soft pockets of gold as you follow the faint sound of footsteps into an open courtyard. The moon is bright tonight, spilling pale light across the gravel and the neatly trimmed pine trees. The air has that cool, faintly metallic taste that comes only in the quietest hours, when the streets are mostly empty, and the few who are awake have a reason for it. Two men stand near the low wall, their silhouettes framed against the night sky. They're not in yukata now, but in lighter, darker layers, garb for moving quietly. Their hands rest casually on their hips, but you can feel the weight of their alertness. These are the Night Watch, samurai assigned to patrol the grounds and keep their household safe while others sleep. a mainstream historical fact. In Edo period Japan, many samurai had rotating guard duties at night, especially in castle towns. Even in times of peace, vigilance was non-negotiable. A lapse in security could mean anything from a burglary to a political scandal, and both could ruin a lord's reputation. The quirkier tidbit? Some guards use subtle signals to communicate in the dark, taps on a wooden beam, a certain cough, or the flick of a paper fan. These were harmless enough not to raise alarm if overheard, but distinct enough for comrades to recognize instantly. In the right hands, a carefully timed yawn could mean all clear. From your place in the shadows, you watch one man pace the perimeter, his sandals whispering over the gravel. The other lingers near the gate, eyes scanning the rooftops as though expecting a shadow to detach itself and glide toward him. Their movements are deliberate but unhurried, the kind that can be kept up for hours without fatigue. Historians still argue whether night watch shifts were truly necessary in peaceful Edo, or whether they were partly ceremonial, a way to remind everyone, friend and foe alike, that vigilance never slept. The truth probably lies somewhere between. Danger was rare, but neglect could make it less so. As the patrol moves on, you notice the effect this system has on the rest of the household. Sleep isn't entirely unbroken. People shift and stir, half aware of footsteps passing outside their walls. A servant slides open a shoji to peek into the courtyard, sees the guards, and closes it again without a word. Somewhere deeper inside, you hear a soft cough. A signal or just someone clearing their throat? Hard to say. The guards meet briefly in the middle of the courtyard, exchanging a few quiet words. One gestures toward the rooftop, the other nods. They part without ceremony, each disappearing into a different corridor of shadow. For a few moments, you're alone with the garden. You step closer to the koi pond at the far end. The water reflects the moon like a smooth piece of glass, but every so often a ripple distorts it. Whether from a fish breaking the surface or the faint breeze through the pines, you can't tell. You imagine being on watch here, the temptation to sink into the stillness, the discipline it would take not to. A faint sound catches your ear, a single tap, somewhere against the wooden railing of the veranda. Not loud enough to draw attention, but distinct if you're listening. A moment later, a figure emerges from the shadows near the outer wall. He moves with purpose toward the gate, exchanges a nod with the standing guard, then vanishes into the alley beyond. No alarm is raised. You suspect this is routine, but the subtlety makes it feel like watching part of a spy drama play out in slow motion. The night stretches on. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the slow clang of the watchman's wooden clappers, a public signal marking the hour. Inside these walls, though, time feels more elastic, stretched between footfalls and the rustle of robes. You return to the inner corridors, passing closed doors behind which the household sleeps lightly. A samurai lying on his futon rolls over at the faint creak of the floorboards. His eyes flick open, just long enough to verify it's nothing urgent, then close again. This is the other side of night watch duty. Even those not assigned to patrol are conditioned to wake at small sounds, a skill honed from years of readiness. As you pass through another sliding door, you glance back toward the courtyard. One of the guards has reappeared, pausing to check the lock on the gate. He moves like a shadow brushing against another shadow, the movement so fluid it barely registers as human. And yet, you can tell he's fully awake. Senses sharp, muscles ready, the calm surface masking the coil of potential energy underneath. Somewhere inside, a brazier's coals crackle faintly, the sound oddly loud in the stillness. You realize the patrol will continue until dawn, the guards changing routes every so often, their quiet signals passing invisibly through the night. It's a net cast wide enough to catch trouble before it ever becomes visible. You slip further down the hall, the faint trace of tatami scent grounding you as the quiet deepens. Ahead, there's the muffled sound of a wooden practice sword striking a target, lightly, rhythmically. Someone, it seems, isn't ready for bed just yet. You follow the muted thunk, thunk, thunk through a half-lit corridor, the glow of a single lantern spilling across a doorway that's been left slightly ajar. The smell of sweat mixed with the faint, grassy tang of tatami rushes out to meet you. Inside, a young samurai stands barefoot, hair tied loosely back, his yukata sleeves rolled high on his forearms. He's holding a bakken, a wooden sword, gripping it with both hands. The room is otherwise quiet, save for the sound of his measured breathing and the occasional whisper of his bare feet sliding to adjust stance. You stay in the shadowed corner, watching. He lifts the bakken overhead, pauses as though aligning the air itself, then drops it in a single smooth strike onto a rolled straw target resting on the floor. The sound is solid but not harsh, the kind of strike that comes from months, maybe years of doing the same thing over and over until it feels like muscle memory made flesh. A mainstream historical fact slips into your mind. Samurai were expected to maintain not just their martial skill, but the discipline of nightly or early morning practice, especially during peacetime. In Edo, Japan, swordsmanship schools flourished, and many warriors belonged to one, even if they spent most of their lives doing paperwork or managing lands. It wasn't just about fighting, it was about cultivating precision, posture, and focus. Here's the quirk. Not all late-night training was solemn or deadly serious. In some domains, young retainers would invent strange challenge drills to keep themselves awake. There are accounts, scattered and sometimes suspicious, of using weighted fans instead of swords or swinging in total darkness to train by sound alone. It's hard to verify which of these were earnest exercises and which were just excuses for late-night shenanigans. Historians still argue whether such informal practice sessions truly improved combat readiness or were more about camaraderie and testing personal endurance. Some claim that warriors who trained too often at night risked dulling their senses for daytime duties. Others say the night was the best teacher, forcing adaptation to poor visibility and unexpected distractions. The young samurai in front of you seems to take it seriously, though. After a dozen slow, deliberate cuts, he shifts into a flurry of quicker ones, feet sliding, hips twisting, breath releasing in controlled bursts. The lantern light catches the sweat on his brow, turning it to tiny beads of gold. Then, unexpectedly, he pauses, sets the bakken down, and picks up a small cup from the floor. Tea, you realize. He sips, grimaces slightly, probably cold by now, then sets it aside. The quiet between strikes is as thick as the shadows in the corners of the room. You notice details. The faint fray on the end of his bakken from repeated impacts, the way the straw target has begun to sag, the faint scuff marks on the tatami where his feet always seem to land. When he resumes, his movements are slower, more meditative. He closes his eyes for a moment before striking, as though relying on something other than sight. It's almost like a private ritual, one not intended for show. After a time, he stops altogether, kneels on the floor, and bows toward the target. You've seen similar gestures in modern martial arts. A quiet acknowledgement, not to an opponent, but to the act of training itself. The respect is as much for the process as for any imagined enemy. A faint shiver passes through the room, not from cold, but from the realization that in an era where battles were rare, the real fight might be against rust, boredom, or the slow erosion of skill. And maybe in its own way, that was harder to win. As you step back into the corridor, the sound of practice fades quickly, replaced by the deep hush of the sleeping household. Somewhere beyond the inner walls, the night watch's footsteps trace their looping path again. The rhythm of the place is strangely comforting. Some sleep, some guard, some train. No one is entirely idle. Further down, you pass a rack of stored weapons, carefully oiled blades wrapped in cloth, yari spears leaning against the wall, and a lacquered bow with its string loosened to rest. They stand in silent testimony to readiness, though some may not have been used in years. In the far corner of the corridor, a paper door stands slightly open, revealing the dim glow of another room. You catch a hint of incense, warmer and more complex than the tea smoke from earlier. Inside, perhaps, is another kind of preparation altogether, one less about muscle and more about the mind. Your steps slow. It seems the night still has more to reveal. You slide the paper door aside just enough to peer in, and the first thing that greets you is a low table scattered with writing brushes, folded scraps of paper, and a single candle burning in a ceramic holder shaped like a crane. The flame leans lazily toward you, disturbed by the draft you've just created. The samurai at the table is older, perhaps in his late 40s, with hair threaded by silver and a calm that seems to radiate outward. His armor is nowhere in sight. Instead, he wears a simple indigo kimono, the fabric softened from years of use. He looks up briefly, acknowledges you with the barest nod, then returns to the sheet in front of him. From your angle, you can see the broad strokes of calligraphy forming under his brush, characters that seem to stretch and breathe like living things. He moves slowly, deliberately, pausing between each one as though listening for its approval before continuing. A mainstream historical fact drifts in. Samurai were not just warriors, but also expected to be literate and versed in the arts. The Bunbu Ryodo ideal, the dual way of the pen and the sword, was deeply rooted in their education. A balanced warrior was as capable of writing poetry or recording official documents as they were of drawing a blade. And here's the quirk. Some samurai kept personal pillow journals. Yes, that was a thing. Not diaries in the modern sense, but short reflections, poems or notes written before sleep, sometimes kept literally under the pillow for privacy. There are tales, half amusing, half poignant, of pillow journals being discovered after a warrior's death, revealing pages full of haiku about mosquitoes, gripes about superiors, or philosophical musings on why the moon looked particularly smug that night. Historians still argue whether such nightly writing was a widespread practice or just a passing fad in certain clans. Some suggest it functioned as mental training, sharpening observation and language. Others think it was more about easing the mind before bed, like counting sheep but with ink stains. The man before you dips his brush again, then writes 3 short lines. Without looking up, he fans the paper gently to dry it, and you notice the faint scent of pine resin in the ink, an expensive choice. He sets the page aside and folds it neatly, sliding it into a small lacquer box beside the table. You wonder how many are in there, years' worth of quiet thought stacked in orderly secrecy. He then reaches for a different sheet of paper and begins to sketch. Not elaborate portraits or landscapes, but small, almost cartoonish figures. One is a man holding what looks suspiciously like a pillow aloft, mid-swing. You can't help the tiny smile tugging at your mouth. Perhaps these journals were more candid than formal. The candle's flame flickers, momentarily pulling your attention to the walls, where a single hanging scroll shows a moonlit bridge over still water. It's not just decoration, it's a mood setter, the way some people today might keep soft jazz or rain sounds on before bed. You think about the contrast. In one part of the household, a young man swings his bokken until sweat drips from his jaw. In this quiet space, an older man writes characters that will likely never leave the box they're stored in. Both are practicing discipline, just in entirely different languages, one of motion, one of ink. He finishes another page, places the brush carefully across its stand, and snuffs the candle with a small ceramic cap. Darkness folds into the room like water poured into a bowl. You can still smell the ink, still sense the faint warmth from the extinguished flame. As you step back, you wonder if centuries later, somewhere in a climate-controlled archive, a historian might stumble across these pages and frown, trying to decide whether they are significant cultural artifacts or just one man's midnight ramblings about pillow fights, tea quality, and the philosophical merits of early bedtime. Out in the corridor again, the hush is deeper now. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the faint rumble of night wind against the wooden shutters. You keep moving, drawn toward the courtyard, because you can just make out the murmur of voices, the occasional muffled laugh, and the unmistakable thump of something soft hitting something else. It seems tonight discipline and mischief might be sharing the same roof. You round the corner into the courtyard and instantly feel the shift in atmosphere. The moon hangs high and bright, spilling silver light over the raked gravel and casting crisp shadows of pine branches across the ground. A faint breeze teases the paper lanterns strung along the veranda, making them sway just enough to send light trembling over the faces gathered there. Half a dozen samurai, off-duty, loose-limbed, and clearly past the evening's formalities, stand in a loose circle. They're not in armor, but in their lighter cotton yukata, sleeves tied back for freedom of movement. And in their hands, not swords, not practice staves, but pillows. Real pillows. Thick cotton cases stuffed with what you guess is buckwheat hulls or soft kapok fiber, the kind used in traditional Japanese bedding. A mainstream historical fact surfaces in your head like a fish breaking the water. Traditional Japanese pillows, makura, were often firm and surprisingly small, sometimes even made with wooden or ceramic bases to keep elaborate hairstyles intact overnight. But these are the full, luxurious kind used for lounging, clearly repurposed for tonight's antics. The group is already mid-bout. Two men face each other in mock battle stances, circling slowly, waiting for the right opening. Then, whoomp, one lunges, swinging his pillow in a wide arc. It lands with a satisfying thud against his opponent's shoulder, sending him staggering back a step. Laughter explodes from the onlookers. Someone shouts mock encouragement, and someone else takes a playful jab at the combatant's terrible grip. Here's the quirk. Pillow fights weren't exactly a codified samurai pastime, but there are Edo period accounts of makura nage, pillow throwing games, especially in hot spring inns where traveling warriors, merchants, or students stayed overnight. The rules, almost non-existent. The objective? Absolute chaos. And while these games were more common among younger, less formal groups, you can imagine the catharsis they offered to men, otherwise bound by layers of etiquette and martial restraint. Historians still argue whether these impromptu pillow matches in samurai households were truly tolerated or quietly frowned upon. Some records hint that senior warriors saw them as harmless stress relief, while others describe stern lectures on maintaining dignity after a particularly noisy scuffle kept half the household awake. Back in the courtyard, one bout ends and another begins almost instantly. A younger warrior tries a sneak attack from the side, only to be intercepted by a pillow to the ribs so perfectly timed it's like watching a kata in cotton form. You can't help but admire the reflexes, centuries of training distilled into the noble art of not getting whacked in the face. There's even strategy here. You notice one man using his pillow almost like a shield, deflecting blows and then countering with short, sharp strikes. Another adopts a spinning style, whipping the pillow around for momentum before landing a blow. The air smells faintly of crushed cotton and the earthy dust of the courtyard gravel. One of the older samurai, sitting cross-legged off to the side, chuckles quietly and sips from a small cup of tea, offering occasional commentary like a sports announcer. "Terrible footwork," he mutters at one point, just loud enough for the offender to hear. You realize that this too is a kind of training, a loosening of the rigid mask, a reminder that the human underneath the armor is still allowed to laugh. The match continues until one man, clearly winded, drops his pillow and raises both hands in defeat. The group cheers his surrender as though he's just yielded in a formal duel, bowing theatrically in response. Someone tosses the victor a folded hand towel as if it were a warrior's prize. You feel a ripple of camaraderie here. Men who may tomorrow stand in precise ranks, every motion calculated, but tonight can indulge in something as ridiculous as a buckwheat pillow duel under the moon. It's the kind of scene no portrait or museum display could ever capture, yet it tells you more about the people than any formal record. As the group begins to disperse, a few linger to chat, their voices low and easy. One man casually tosses his pillow toward a wooden bench, and it lands with a soft thud, sending a small puff of dust into the lantern light. Another stretches, yawns, and mutters something about the real fight being against his futon tonight. courtyard empties until only the quiet remains. The chirp of a late summer cricket, the faint rustle of pine needles, and the steady glow of the moon overhead. You take one last glance at the pillows lying abandoned in the gravel, like the aftermath of a very polite battlefield. Then you slip back toward the house, following the scent of tea and the promise of softer sounds. Somewhere ahead you hear the creak of floorboards and the gentle slosh of water in a basin. Bedtime is drawing closer, not just for them, but for you too. And it seems the next step in this nightly ritual is already waiting. You follow the muffled sounds down a short wooden hallway, your bare feet sinking slightly into the woven tatami mats. The air here is warmer, humid in a comforting way, carrying the faint scent of green tea and something floral, maybe chrysanthemum. You step into a softly lit room where a few samurai sit or kneel around low tables, each with a steaming cup in front of them. The transition from pillow fight chaos to this serene scene feels like plunging into still water. No one raises their voice here. Conversations flow in the low tones, punctuated by the occasional chuckle. The samurai cradle their teacups with the same care they might show when handling a treasured sword. Fingers precise, movements economical, no wasted energy. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Tea drinking in samurai culture wasn't just about hydration or even enjoyment. It was often tied to the shanoyu, the Japanese tea ceremony, which emphasized harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. By the Edo period, even warriors had embraced it as both a refined art and a mental discipline. That said, tonight's mood is far more casual. This isn't a formal ceremony. It's a winding down ritual, more like a familiar bedtime drink before retreating to rest. You notice one samurai swirling the last sip in his cup before drinking it with a soft slurp. That's not poor manners here, it's considered a way to fully appreciate the flavor. The tea itself is pale green, slightly cloudy, and the steam carries the grassy aroma of fresh leaves. The quirk tonight is that, along with the tea, someone's brought out yokin, a sweet jelly made of red bean paste, agar, and sugar, sliced into perfect rectangular blocks. A few warriors nibble them with chopsticks, pairing the sweetness with the tea's bitterness. You wouldn't expect hardened fighters to fuss over dessert presentation, yet here they are, debating, lightheartedly, whether the yokan is too soft or just right. Historians still argue whether tea drinking among samurai was primarily a matter of social bonding, or a deliberate meditative act to steady the mind before sleep. Some accounts describe warriors using it almost like a pre-battle ritual, focused, silent, deliberate. Others point to evenings like this one, where tea is just an excuse to linger in good company, letting conversation meander toward nothing in particular. One man begins telling a story about a disastrous tea session during a long march. Apparently, a fellow warrior had tried to impress everyone by brewing tea from local wild leaves. Unfortunately, the leaves were not only bitter, but mildly laxative, a detail met with quiet snickers from around the table. The storyteller leans in conspiratorially and assures you that no one was harmed, except perhaps indignity. You take in the small details, the sheen of lacquer on the teacups, the faint scratching sound as chopsticks lift the yokin from the plate, the way the steam curls upward and vanishes into the dim lamplight. There's a hypnotic rhythm to the scene. Pick up cup, sip, set down, quiet laugh, repeat. Someone slides open a shoji panel to let in a cooler breeze. Outside, the night insects sing softly, their chorus mixing with the faint crackle from a brazier in the corner. A young samurai near the doorway leans back slightly, eyes half closed, clearly fighting the pull of sleep. His companions tease him gently, telling him not to fall asleep sitting up unless you want a stiff neck. You're beginning to feel the same slow wave of drowsiness creep into your own bones. The warmth of the room, the gentle hum of conversation, the steady hand movements. It all works like a lullaby in slow motion. The edge of tension left from earlier play seems to dissolve here. No armor, no urgent duties, no need to project formality. Just men, tea, and the simple comfort of the night settling in. One of the older samurai rises and begins clearing cups, moving with such unhurried precision that you almost don't notice he's already stacked 3 in one hand. He sets them aside, wipes the table with a cloth, and then bows slightly before stepping out. The others begin to follow, drifting toward the adjoining rooms where futons have already been laid out. You watch them go, noticing the faint shuffle of feet against tatami, the quiet rustle of cotton yukata. Somewhere in the background, a kettle still simmers faintly, as if promising a final cup for anyone who lingers. You rise too, feeling the pull of sleep in your limbs. The house feels even quieter now, the voices fading into the soft architecture of the night. You move toward the sliding doors at the far end where another room awaits. A space more intimate, more deliberate. A place where the act of preparing for sleep itself becomes its own small ritual. The air beyond those doors is cooler again, touched with the scent of freshly folded linen. You can almost picture the rows of futons waiting, the pillows fluffed, the soft layers ready to accept the weight of tired warriors. And perhaps in some corner, another pillow fight brewing for tomorrow. For now, though, the tea has done its work. Your mind feels quieter, your pace slower, your breath deeper. You step forward, ready for the final stages of the night's rhythm. You slide open the panel and step into a room that feels like a whispered secret. The lamps here are dimmer, their glow diffused through thin paper screens, turning every shadow soft and unthreatening. A hush hangs in the air, like the pause between deep breaths, broken only by the muted swish of fabric as a few samurai prepare their futons. The tatami underfoot feels warmer, maybe because the air is thicker here, scented faintly with cedar from the futon frames stacked neatly against one wall. Some of the men are already spreading theirs on the floor, layering quilted covers over the mats with the kind of care one might give to setting a sword on display. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the Edo period, most samurai didn't sleep on fixed beds. They used futons, thick padded mats, rolled up and stored during the day to make more room in the small, multifunctional rooms. At night, these were unrolled directly onto tatami mats, often with a separate padded blanket for warmth. You notice a younger warrior struggling with his futon, its fold refusing to line up neatly. His companion, without a word, takes one corner and smooths it out in a swift, practiced motion. There's something quietly touching about the gesture. In a culture that valued discipline and formality, these small acts of domestic help often went unspoken but not unnoticed. Tonight's quirky detail? In one corner, an older samurai is stuffing small bundles of dried mugwort leaves into the pillowcases. You've seen this before. It's an old folk habit said to repel insects and soothe the mind. The earthy scent rises quickly, mingling with the cedar and creating an oddly grounding aroma. He swears it's the reason he hasn't had a mosquito bite in years. Whether it's true or not, you can't help but think it's preferable to the medieval European habit of stuffing pillows with straw, which, while functional, also occasionally hosted a thriving flea population. Historians still argue whether samurai sleeping arrangements were designed purely for practicality or if the simplicity itself was a conscious philosophical choice. Some point to Zen influence, minimalist surroundings promoting mental clarity, while others believe it was simply a matter of space and convenience in tightly built houses. You catch a faint murmur of conversation. Two men are discussing tomorrow's duties in voices low enough to avoid disturbing anyone already settling in. There's no sense of urgency, just the acknowledgement of a day ahead, as inevitable as the sun rising. One warrior kneels, folding his outer robe neatly beside his futon. Another drapes his over a wooden stand, smoothing the sleeves as though preparing it for inspection. Even at bedtime, there's a graceful economy to their movements. No wasted gestures, no careless tossing of clothes onto the floor. The lamps flicker slightly and a warm pool of light glides across the tatami, illuminating a small tray of nighttime items. A folded towel, a small pot of water, a comb, and, unexpectedly, a neatly wrapped parcel. You're tempted to ask what's inside, but the samurai who placed it there has already extinguished his lamp and pulled his quilt over his shoulder. There's a rhythm to this winding down process. Spread futon, set pillow, smooth blanket, store belongings. It's quiet work, almost meditative. The only interruptions are the occasional soft cough or the muffled thud of someone kneeling down. And then there's the sound that sneaks in from outside, the night insects again, joined now by the distant burble of water, maybe a small garden stream. It's the kind of background noise that you don't notice right away, but then realize you've been listening to for minutes. Its constancy wrapping around you like an extra layer of warmth. In the far corner, a young samurai yawns so widely that the man next to him chuckles. Someone teases that he'll swallow his own sword if he's not careful. The joke is met with a sleepy grin and a muffled, "I'll risk it." You kneel down, feeling the gentle give of the tatami beneath your knees. Your hands press into the cool cotton of the futon cover, and for a moment you imagine what it must feel like to slide under it after a day of carrying armor, sparring, and let's not forget, engaging in competitive pillow combat. The room seems to exhale as more lamps are dimmed. The shadows deepen, stretching into the corners. You hear the faint rustle of someone shifting into position, the whisper of quilted fabric sliding over skin. A few murmured goodnights are exchanged, though most men seem to prefer silence. There's one more sound, faint, rhythmic, someone brushing their hair slowly, each stroke deliberate. You glance toward it and see the glint of a lacquered comb catching what little light remains. The hair falls smoothly over his shoulder, then is tied with a simple cord. Another quiet ritual completed, another step toward rest. You wake, or rather you half-wake, to the faint smell of smoke. Not the alarming kind, but the soft, woody scent of incense, curling lazily from a small ceramic burner in the corner. Its thin ribbon drifts and sways, vanishing before it touches the ceiling. Outside, dawn hasn't even thought about showing up yet. The air feels still, like the house itself is reluctant to move. Someone is already up. You hear the muted shuffle of bare feet on tatami and the quiet clink of pottery. A samurai kneels at a low table, pouring tea into a cup so small, you'd need 3 of them to match your usual morning mug. Steam coils upward, catching the dim glow from a solitary lamp. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this stretch. While we think of tea ceremonies as formal affairs, samurai often enjoyed casual tea drinking as a simple, personal ritual. Especially before bed or in the still dark hours of the morning, a small cup of green tea wasn't about ceremony. It was about warmth, calm, and starting or ending the day with a centered mind. But tonight's odd tidbit is less about tea and more about nocturnal snacks. You watch another samurai sneak into the room holding what looks suspiciously like a small rice ball wrapped in paper. He unwraps it slowly, too slowly for it to be anything but an attempt at stealth, and takes a bite, eyes darting to see if anyone notices. Turns out, midnight snacking wasn't entirely foreign to the Edo-era household. Some warriors kept small bites of rice or dried fish tucked away for late-night hunger, though it was often frowned upon as a lack of self-discipline. Historians still argue whether such quiet nighttime routines were a sign of discipline breaking down in the peaceful Edo period, or simply an adaptation to longer, more sedentary days without constant battle. Some say the slower pace encouraged small luxuries, while others claim the warrior spirit was being softened by such comforts. A few others stir from their futons now, though nobody's talking loudly. It's the kind of gentle movement you might see in a shared hostel. Everyone aware of everyone else, tiptoeing through the space. Someone quietly folds away his bedding to clear the floor while another pulls on a light robe, knotting the sash without looking down. You notice a curious little object on the tea maker's table, a small, palm-sized wooden box with a sliding lid. When he opens it, you see tiny sticks of incense tucked neatly inside, each one tied with thread. The faint scent you smelled earlier suddenly deepens as he lights another. This one's sharper, almost citrusy. You imagine what it must be like to drift to sleep every night with that fragrance seeping into your dreams. The quiet is suddenly interrupted by a faint knock on one of the sliding doors. It slides open just far enough for a servant to pass in a tray, then closes again without a word. On the tray are 2 more teacups and a small dish of pickled plums. They're bright, almost glowing against the plain ceramic, small bursts of red in an otherwise shadow-toned world. Someone jokes softly that the plums are a test of manhood. If you can eat one without puckering your face, you're ready for any battle. This earns a muffled laugh from across the room, and you feel the camaraderie here. Quiet, understated, but unmistakable. As the teacups are passed around, the steam rises in slow spirals, carrying that grassy, roasted scent that feels both energizing and soothing at once. You take a sip, the warmth sliding down into your chest, cutting through the coolness of the early morning air. The bitterness fades into something almost sweet on the back of your tongue. A few men shift back into their bedding, wrapping themselves tightly against the chill, while others seem to be preparing for an early start. You can hear the faint rustle of armor pieces being moved somewhere beyond the walls, a reminder that no matter how peaceful the night feels, the day will bring duties. But for now, in this suspended time before sunrise, the atmosphere is more like a quiet family kitchen than a warrior's barracks. Small rituals, tea poured, futons folded, incense burned, carry more weight than any drill or battle plan. One of the men, his hair still loose and falling over his shoulders, sits cross-legged near the doorway and watches the steam drift from his cup. His eyes half close, and for a moment, you think he might fall asleep sitting up. Instead, he lets out a long, slow sigh, like he's letting go of something you can't see. The incense has burned down to a stub now, the smoke curling low before it vanishes. You feel yourself drawn toward your own futon again, the pull of warmth and rest stronger than the curiosity of watching the room's quiet ballet. You lie back, the quilt settling over you like a soft weight. The tea's warmth still lingers in your chest, and the faint citrus scent hovers at the edge of your senses. Somewhere nearby, a soft laugh trails off into nothing, replaced by the steady rhythm of breathing around you. And just before sleep claims you again, you hear one voice barely above a whisper. Tomorrow, we use 2 pillows each. The absurdity of it makes you smile even as your eyes close. You're woken this time by the unmistakable sound of someone clattering around with wooden practice swords. Not the deep metallic clang of real steel, just the lighter, sharper thwack of bicon striking one another. It's still dim outside, that slate gray light that comes right before dawn, and you realize a few early risers have decided to stretch their limbs with some friendly sparring before the day begins. One fact to anchor you here: morning training was common for samurai, but it didn't always involve heavy armor and battlefield drills. In quieter times, especially in Edo-era castle towns, lighter practice with bakken or unarmed exercises, similar to what would later become martial arts kata, were as much about mental focus as physical readiness. You shift in your bedding to get a better look. 2 samurai still wearing their sleeping robes face off in the open space. They circle each other lazily, not with the tense readiness of combat, but with the sleepy patience of people who haven't had their tea yet. The first strike comes almost reluctantly, the bakken meeting with a hollow knock that echoes in the small room. And here's your quirky tidbit of the morning. Someone on the sidelines is keeping score by moving beans from one bowl to another. Each clean hit gets a bean. The bowl is already half full, and you can't help but wonder if the winner gets some kind of absurd prize. Maybe an extra pillow in tonight's inevitable pillow fight. Historians still argue whether these light-hearted matches were truly part of maintaining a warrior's discipline, or simply an excuse to socialize in the pre-breakfast hours. Some scholars believe they kept skills sharp without exhausting the body. Others suspect the practice was more of a camaraderie exercise, especially in garrison life where boredom could become a real threat. Your eyes wander from the match to the far wall, where armor stands like patient sentries. Helmets rest on wooden pegs, their lacquered surfaces catching the first glimmers of daylight. A few breastplates gleam faintly, the dim light outlining their curves and rivets. It's oddly comforting to see them at rest, silent, unmoving, like even they're allowed to sleep in. A voice calls softly from outside and the match stops mid-step. One of the fighters bows, setting his bakken down carefully, then pads off toward the sound. Moments later, the smell of rice cooking wafts into the room. You can almost hear your own stomach perk up. Before breakfast arrives, someone decides to sneak in one last round. This time, the prize is apparently first pick of the morning meal. The Bean Bowl referee grins and announces the terms in a low voice, and the players immediately liven up, trading faster, sharper blows. You feel the quiet energy shift from sleepy to competitive. The match ends quickly, one player slipping past the other's guard with a light tap to the ribs. The room fills with muffled laughter, and the loser accepts his fate, probably resigned to whatever unappealing side dish will be left by the time his turn comes. You roll to your side and notice someone in the corner wrapping a strip of cloth around his head, smoothing it out with a careful precision. It's not for sweat, not yet. It's more like a personal pre-training ritual. These tiny actions, tying a knot just so, folding a robe before sparring, make you realize how much of a samurai's life was shaped by small habits, not just grand battles. Outside, you hear the slow thump of a taiko drum, a signal of some kind. Not a battle call, just the routine morning rhythm of the compound. The sound is deep, almost like a heartbeat, and you find yourself matching your breathing to it without thinking. The door slides open, and trays of breakfast enter. Miso soup steaming in wooden bowls, small dishes of pickles, and neatly shaped rice balls. The victorious sparring partner gets his pick first, holding up a bowl of soup like it's a trophy. The others don't seem to mind. They're too busy tucking into their portions with the quiet focus of people who know how to enjoy food. You're handed a rice ball, still warm from the kitchen, the seaweed wrapping crisp between your fingers. The first bite is pure comfort, soft, lightly salted with a hint of plum in the center. Paired with the miso's savory depth, it's enough to make you forget you were still half asleep just minutes ago. As you eat, someone starts retelling the highlights of the sparring match, exaggerating every movement until it's practically a kabuki performance. The others nod along, half amused, half uninterested, because in truth, these little contests happen almost every morning. When the food is gone, the trays are stacked neatly by the door, and the air fills again with the scent of tea being poured. The sunlight now has a golden edge, filtering through the paper screens and painting the room with soft warmth. You sip your tea and let your gaze drift over the relaxed faces around you. It's hard to picture these same men riding into battle, armor clattering, eyes sharp. In this moment, they're just people, stretching, chatting softly, leaning back against the walls with their teacups. You wonder if this is what they remember most about their lives later. Not the chaos of war, but the quiet mornings filled with simple routines, small competitions, and the comfort of shared meals. The bean bowl sits on the table now, forgotten, a few strays rolling at the bottom. Maybe they'll reset it tonight, maybe not. Either way, you have a feeling the next score will be kept in feathers, not beans. You're lulled back into a half-doze by the sound of low voices outside, carrying the faint rhythm of gossip rather than commands. The morning air has taken on that almost sweet coolness, right before the sun climbs high enough to warm the earth, and you catch a drift of something herbal. Maybe the tea leaves drying in the courtyard. Maybe someone's laundry steeped in cedar water. One solid historical fact drifts into your thoughts. In Edo period Japan, the concept of asaburoi, Literally, morning chatter was considered a socially acceptable pastime for samurai households. This was when neighbors or fellow retainers exchanged news, discussed minor disputes, or, as you're overhearing now, probably traded a few pointed jokes about someone's last clumsy sparring session. Leaning against the wall, you glance toward the open shoji screen. The courtyard beyond is bathed in soft light, the pale gravel path still cool and undisturbed. Two older samurai sit cross-legged near the veranda, cups in hand, sipping with a deliberate slowness that makes you think they've already had their share of excitement in life, and now intend to savor the quieter hours. Here's your quirky tidbit. One of them is cradling what looks like a small, carefully carved wooden pillow, almost like a display piece, while explaining in earnest how it improves posture during sleep. The other is nodding gravely, though you can see in his eyes he's only half buying it. Whether it's a genuine health hack, or just an elaborate excuse to flaunt a new possession, you can't tell. Historians still argue whether these wooden headrests were primarily practical, meant to keep elaborate hairstyles intact, or ceremonial, a sort of status accessory in the sleeping quarters. Some even suggest they doubled as mild self-discipline tools. If you tossed and turned too much, you'd wake yourself up, forcing a calmer sleeping habit. You, however, can't help imagining how many late-night grumbles they must have caused. A sudden laugh cuts through the courtyard, light and infectious. You notice a younger retainer carrying a small basket of folded cloth squares. He hands one to each person in the group, explaining they're for tonight's game. The term he uses is vague, but the way everyone smirks makes it clear this is code for some kind of mischief, most likely involving those nightly pillow duels. You shift your gaze to the far corner where a narrow wooden rack holds a row of fans, each painted with delicate scenes. Cherry blossoms, cranes in flight, a mountain path. At first they seem purely decorative, but then one of the older men picks one up and, with a flick of the wrist, demonstrates a series of movements. Fanning air, snapping the fan closed, then using it almost like a baton to tap an imaginary opponent on the forehead. It turns out these weren't just for cooling yourself on hot days. In some circles, fans, tessen, were actually disguised iron weapons, used for self-defense when carrying a sword wasn't allowed. It's not hard to imagine a bored group of retainers adapting that into a friendly competition, substituting real blows with playful taps. The courtyard begins to fill slowly. First a pair of children carrying buckets of water for the garden, then a woman with a tray of pickled plums, then another man leading a sleepy dog on a leash made from braided hemp. The rhythm of the place is gentle, like a village breathing together. Someone nearby mutters about the weather, pointing to a bank of clouds low in the west. A brief discussion follows about whether it will rain later, which somehow segues into a debate about the proper stuffing ratio for a summer pillow. You don't follow every word, but the animated gestures alone make the topic seem urgent. One man, clearly proud of his knowledge, explains that lighter stuffing allows better airflow on hot nights, while heavier stuffing keeps the pillow from escaping during restless sleep. The others nod or roll their eyes in varying degrees of agreement. You file this away, knowing full well it'll be the sort of trivia you can bring up at the next dull dinner party, assuming anyone's willing to listen to a lecture about samurai pillow ergonomics. By now the light has shifted, the golden warmth spilling deeper into the corridor. A soft clinking sound draws your attention to the veranda steps, where a young woman arranges cups and a teapot on a low, lacquered tray. The steam curls upward, carrying that grassy, almost marine scent of fresh brewed green tea. The group falls quiet as she pours, the thin stream glinting briefly before disappearing into the cup. You're handed one as well, the heat seeping into your fingers, grounding you. The tea is slightly bitter, slightly sweet, with a hint of umami that lingers long after the sip. It feels like a punctuation mark at the end of the morning's easy conversation, a signal that everyone will soon drift into their daily duties. And yet, just before dispersing, The younger samurai with the basket of cloth squares reminds everyone about tonight. His grin widens, and you catch a glint in his eye that says he's already planning some elaborate ambush once the lights are out. The others respond with mock groans or sly nods, but no one refuses. It's in moments like this you realize that despite the stiff formality often associated with samurai culture, there's an undercurrent of play that weaves through it all. Games, inside jokes, and a surprising amount of talk about pillows. Maybe that's the balance. Steel in the daylight, feathers at night. As the courtyard begins to empty, you take another sip of tea, committing the scene to memory. The rustle of robes, the creak of the wooden deck, the faint crunch of gravel as someone steps away. Soon enough, the next part of the day will pull everyone into separate tasks. But for now, the air is still thick with the warmth of shared company. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you're already curious to see how tonight's game unfolds. The day hums forward, and by the time the sun begins its slow descent, you can feel the compound shifting into evening mode. The clang of the forge fades to a dull tapping. The shouts from the training yard give way to murmured conversations, and the scent of grilled fish drifts lazily over the walls. Somewhere, a shakuhachi flute sends up a wistful, meandering tune. You're not entirely sure how the game is going to start, but there's an undeniable sense of conspiracy in the air. Passing through the main corridor, you spot the younger samurai from this morning, the one with the basket of cloth squares, moving briskly between rooms, whispering something to each person he meets. Every time he leaves, the recipient's face breaks into a barely suppressed grin. Dinner is a subdued affair, though. The meal is served in lacquered trays: rice, pickled radish, miso soup, and grilled mackerel, set neatly before each person. The only hint of mischief is the way eyes flick from one side of the room to the other, as though everyone is mentally measuring distances. You can't help wondering if seating arrangements matter in a samurai pillow fight. Afterward, the tatami rooms are prepared for night. The bedding is unrolled, pillows carefully set at the head, mosquito nets suspended like pale curtains. The scent of freshly beaten futon lingers, a faint clean straw aroma mixed with traces of sun and dust. Then, without any formal announcement, the game begins. It starts as a ripple, a quiet thwump in the corner, followed by a sharp intake of breath, then laughter muffled by sleeves. A man who is in the middle of folding his robe now brandishes his pillow like a shield. His opponent, grinning, crouches low and advances. A second whump. Someone on the far side of the room dives behind a bedding roll, peeking out with predatory intent. In the soft lantern light, the whole thing feels like a battle reenactment, performed in miniature. Feints, sudden charges, strategic retreats into the shadows. The pillows, of course, aren't the soft, downy kind you're used to. They're firmer, stuffed with buckwheat hulls or cotton, giving each strike a satisfying weight. There's skill here, oddly enough. You notice how some participants aim for the pillow's corner, which delivers a sharper impact, while others swing the full width like a fan, catching their target off guard with a gust of air. A few even incorporate footwork from sparring drills, pivoting smoothly out of reach before countering. But it's not all serious strategy. Someone feigns a dramatic death, collapsing across the tatami in slow motion. Another drops his weapon entirely to wrestle the nearest opponent into an undignified headlock, both of them laughing too hard to continue. Even the older men from this morning, who seemed far too dignified for such nonsense, have joined in, their laughter deep and booming. Historically, pillow fights in samurai quarters weren't exactly documented in official records for obvious reasons, but scholars speculate that they served as a form of bonding, a pressure valve for men whose lives were otherwise governed by rigid decorum. You can see it clearly now, the way this play erases ranks at least for a few minutes, turning retainers, officers, and attendants into nothing more than gleeful children. The game peaks when someone attempts a double strike, lunging with one pillow in each hand. The move looks impressive but ends in chaos when he loses balance, colliding with a stack of folded bedding and sending it tumbling across the room. The laughter that follows is loud enough to wake the courtyard dogs. Gradually, the energy ebbs. Pillows are set back in place, futons smoothed out, and mosquito nets drawn. Breathing slows, voices drop. You find yourself lying back, staring at the delicate wooden beams overhead, still smiling at the absurdity of it all. Somewhere nearby, a voice murmurs a good night. The lantern light dims, leaving only the outline of sleeping forms and the faint rustle of fabric as people settle in. Outside, crickets resume their song, steady and hypnotic. The samurai have put away their play for the night, returning to the discipline that shapes their days. But you know, just as they do, that tomorrow will bring the same cycle. Steel by day, feathers by night. You drift into sleep, the memory of laughter still echoing faintly in your mind.